Now, what is famous fan fiction? Well, essentially, it's fan fiction that a lot of people know about. But this only just very briefly gets into it. There's a difference between famous that people like and famous that is infamous. So, how many of you know about cupcakes? Probably everyone in this room. How many of you have read Cupcakes?
This is my first fic I've ever read.
How many of you consider it one of your top 10 all-time favorite fics ever?
No.
Only 2. All right, let's do another example. Rainbow Factory. Raise your hands if you've heard of it. Probably everyone.
Love the song.
All right, if you've never, the story, not the song. Now lower your hand if you haven't read it. If you attended the reading last night, that counts. All right, so now leave your hand up if it's one of your top 10 favorites all time of fan fiction. Sluggy, I think you're trolling me, man.
No, I'm not.
It's your favorite. Okay, I won't. There you go. It's one of your top 10 favorites. All right, so those are probably what I'd consider to be infamous fan fictions. Those fan fictions were written. They captured something in the fandom that people, Pinkie Pie chopping up Rainbow Dash and making her into cupcakes. How controversial. Rainbow Factory, they're crushing up Pegasi and making them into rainbows. How controversial. So, is it famous in terms of quality? Yes, sir.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I need people who actually drew these zoning pictures to come with me. I'm sorry. We are all going to a factory. Seriously, does anybody know which general direction is on the door?
Do it that way.
Did you have a question?
Actually, I was going to bring up another as bad fic.
What?
Rocket to Insanity.
Okay, Rocket to Insanity. Anyone know of that one?
I think I've heard of it.
Payless Foss made an album for it.
Ah. Yeah, so there's a lot of, as you can tell from my examples, I mean, I could go into more examples, but I'm not going to.
Examples for the examples.
Examples for the examples, is that there's a lot of fictions out there that are famous because they did something controversial. Now let's talk about the ones that people really love and they write side stories for. So let's talk about Fallout Equestria. That's a big, okay, yeah. Probably everyone in this room, whether you've played Fallout or not, has probably heard of it. There's like a zillion side stories written of it. So how many of you, raise your hands if you've read through all 600,000 words of it?
Right here.
It's on my list.
All right, 4 people. Leave your hands up if it's one of your top 10 favorites. 5 people. Okay, so it's your favorite, you haven't finished reading it. There you go.
I would never finish reading it.
Yeah. Well, by comparison, it's the length of Atlas Shrugged, so there you go.
I haven't finished Atlas Shrugged.
You've read Atlas Shrugged?
I've read some of it, just like I've read some of Fallout Equestria. I don't read incredibly long books. All right, so let's talk about Past Sins. How many of you have heard of Past Sins? Probably everyone in this room. How many of you have read Past Sins? How many of you think Past Sins is one of your top 10 favorites? Like 4 people. So as you can see, and I can go into more examples too, like I can go into some of like short skirt stuff, but I think you guys get the general idea, is that there's a difference between famous for being infamous and famous because people really like it and really connect with it. It's the difference between Waterworld and, The Room with Tommy Wiseau on the one hand side. I'm not saying that Rainbow Factory and Cupcakes are bad.
You wrote Westboro Baptist Church in Equestria?
Yes, I wrote a fic called Westboro and Equestria.
Oh my god!
I actually read it.
Yes?
I emailed the Westboro Baptist Church.
You did?
Never got a reply. I said, I'm a gay Buddhist, just discovered Christianity. What can I do to repent for my sins? They never sent me a reply.
Oh, well, they're not doing their job then.
I know.
Yeah, I wrote Westboro and Equestria, so I don't know if any of you have ever heard of that. Apparently Sluggy has before.
I read it.
You read it.
Yes.
Is it one of your top 10 favorites ever?
No, I just read it because you did the job.
Yeah, probably. So yeah. As you can see, there's two different types. So there's a difference between Waterworld, The Room, Twilight, things like that, and Star Wars or Harry Potter, or these things that people really...
This Twilight?
No.
Oh,
no. The sparkly vampires, sir.
This Twilight?
No, you are very fortunate to be uninformed on that. So, now we're going to talk a little bit about what makes a fan fiction famous. So, I listed off these examples, and we all just kind of take for granted that they're famous. But, you know, why? Like, what is it about these stories that we like? So, let's start with Fallout Equestria, since that seems to be a favorite in this room. Why do you guys... I'm going to pick on some people who like it. What about it do you like?
I think it was actually one of the first really awesomely well done crossovers that came out. Back when the fan fiction was just getting started up. And it's the same way with Cupcakes and other horror fics like that.
Yeah, and that is another thing I wanted to mention too. A lot of these people who got famous and have famous fan fictions now, they got in on the ground floor of it. They got in when My Little Pony was still on 4chan, back when Equestria Daily would post whatever bullshit they wanted to, you know, back during the early days, the dark ages of the MLP fandom, you know, before things really got into their stride. So, you know, it's like you plant a seed in the ground early enough, and, you know, it just grows into this huge tree, you know, while the world is young. But, you know, now that there's, I mean, I've read things that are far more ridiculous and gruesome and horrible than anything Cupcakes or Rainbow Factory ever conceived of, but no one knows about it because it wasn't early. It's like concrete. If you leave your handprint in the concrete, then you can see it. Come back a couple days later, the only way you're going to leave a print in that concrete is if you take a sledgehammer to it. So, a lot more effort to leave a lot less nice of an impression. So, the concrete analogy, I think, is a good way to describe how a lot of these fanfiction became famous. Now, am I saying that it isn't possible to still become famous? No. What I am saying is that unless you have a time machine, it's probably not going to be possible to become as famous as the fics that I've mentioned. And there's a couple more I haven't mentioned. Like, I haven't mentioned Background Pony, I haven't mentioned the Conversion Bureau, you know, I haven't mentioned It's a Dangerous Business, I haven't mentioned any of those. But I think you get the idea. The vast, vast majority of the fics that we now consider famous as a community were written before the year 2012, even. So, how do you become, you know, you can still get a sledgehammer, and you can still knock at that concrete. So, now we're going to talk a little bit about how do you do that. And probably one of the main ways I've tried to do it, I mean, I got into writing fanfiction relatively late. I mean, I didn't start until this year. So, I still have managed to become somewhat well known. I mean, 250 Fimfic followers. I'm not in the top echelons, and I may never be. But, you know, I've still done that. Well, one of the things that I do is I write a lot. I write a lot of different stories. I just throw a bunch of stuff against the wall and see what sticks. And I haven't gotten famous, but I have gotten recognized for these things. So, there's that. So, you know, you can do something and just keep throwing darts against the wall, and one of them's bound to hit the bullseye sooner or later. Just statistical probability. You know, or if becoming famous, I mean, as a writer, like, how many of you write? Raise your hands if you write. Alright, and I'm assuming that of all 7 of you, or however many of you it was, I'm assuming that you would like it if your works would become well known. Like, it wouldn't be, you know, you don't want mediocrity. I don't think anybody does. But, you know, that shouldn't ever be, you know, you shouldn't write things just to get them noticed. And, you know, I don't really follow my own advice because I do write things to get noticed, and it works. But, you know, if you write but I also write things because I enjoy writing them. So, you know, it's not like I'm on there just to be famous. You know, I have my stuff that I put out there because I know it's going to be popular. And then I have stuff that I write that no one knows about, but that I write it because I enjoy writing. So, I think that's kind of what you have to do. Is you have to, like, never forget, like, the reason you write. It's because you like the show. You know, it's because you have a story that you want to tell. And I think that is the main way that you really have quality. So, I'm going to open up the floor to some questions. Right here.
Okay, I have a question. What are your thoughts on starting fanfics? Hi, I am Blue Pegasus. I am 6 feet tall and weigh 300 pounds and go to Equestria High School. What are your thoughts on when people do that in a fanfic?
When people give their physical description in the beginning of their fanfic?
Yes.
No, don't do it. Never do it. I will never read it. No one will ever read it.
Okay.
Actually, if I may add on that, my name is Ben. I'm a Fimfiction writer. I have 4 stories on fimfiction.net. Giving too much information at the beginning will overwhelm your reader and it will turn them away immediately. Don't do it. It's the best way to make your reader disinterested, to make your reader not want to go into that next chapter to see what happens next. So, if you want to keep people from reading your stuff,
It's a great way to do it.
yeah, give them way too much information way too soon. My personal preference for writing is give them some information at the beginning, just enough so that they understand what's going on. Then get on with the storyline, and in between scenes, give them more information. Slowly feed them that relevant information.
Bingo. Question.
What's the easiest way to start off? Because I am wanting to write several stories, and I just don't know what is the easiest way to get myself off the ground.
Easiest way? Well, the way I started writing, I have this huge, long, epic story called The Trouble with Unicorns that nobody's ever read. But the reason, it is finished, if any of you want to read it, but the way I did it was I went in there, I had this outline, I had chapter-by-chapter outlines, and I had, everything I wanted to happen, and then I sat down to write, and I didn't follow any of it. So I would advise you not to do that. I would advise you to just have a general idea of the ending, and then just go from there. And really the hardest thing is to just sit down and write. Once you do that, if you're anything like me, you'll just start typing and typing, and you won't even know where all the time went and how you ended up with 1,000 words on your page already.
Right. I was also wondering something. Do you think it's better to write the entire story and put it out there at once, or give out a couple chapters? Say, if you want to continue reading this, I'll write some more if enough people like it or give feedback. Which do you think would be best to do that between those two?
Okay, what I always did, and what I've done with every one of my multi-chapter stories, which is all 3 of them, I think. I mostly do one-shot, goofy, comedy, off-the-wall stories. But, the serious, adventure stories that I write, that's exactly what I do as a second option. What I always do is I'll start chapter 1, chapter 2, I'll post a couple, and then people will give feedback. They'll just be like, oh, hey, I don't like what you did here, or I really like what you did here, or, you need to take this part out, it doesn't add anything. So, I get feedback, and then I go back and revise it. And then, I keep that in mind for future chapters. I mean, you could write it all at once and then post it. Either way, whatever you do, don't post one single chapter that's 70,000 words long because nobody's ever going to read it. No. What you need to do, you need to break that up into probably anywhere from 20 to 50 chapters. And, because the key is exposure. If you want exposure for your stuff, don't be that one guy, though, who posts, a 200-word chapter just to get a bump. I'd say any reasonable amount would be from, say, 1,000 to maybe 5,000. Anything over 5,000, you're writing way too much, and people are going to look at that number and they're going to say, I'm not going to read a 7,000-word long chapter. If you're an author like Short Skirts and Explosions or whoever, and, you're known for writing these long, lengthy stories with a chapter update every single day, like he did with the Australia series, if you're known for that, then you can get away with it, but since you're not, don't do it. Just do any chapter from 1,000 words to 5,000 words, and just go from there. Question.
So you're saying that, big word numbers would scare people off, in a single chapter. Because me, I love reading, I read a lot of stuff.
Right.
And that doesn't scare me off at all. I'll read, 100,000 words or something, but...
Well, you are the exception to the rule.
I'm the weird one? You are. I don't read stories that are 20,000 words. I usually go for 200 to 600,000.
Yeah, well, and some people are like that. Some people really just want to sit down. There's even a group on fimfiction.net called Long Fix.
Really?
And you should look it up.
All the groups.
Yeah. Also check out my groups. Yeah, Long Fix or Long. It's not my group, it's somebody else's. Go
I
ahead.
have another question. Is it better to do stick with just one general kind of genre of the way you write, or is it a good idea to kind of spread out to different kind of areas, like lighter, happy stories here, or darker, more gory, like Cupcakes or something like that, and just kind of go around, or is it better just to stick to one area?
All right, I'll tell you what I've done, and I'll tell you what works for most of the authors who have gotten famous, like Penstroke, Short Skirts, most of the guys in the top 50 authors on Fimfic, Regidar, Brony Stories, people like that. The way that most of them do it, and the way that I personally do it, like, I write a lot of different genres of story. Like most of my stories, I've published 31. Most of them are one-shots, most of them are comedy, but not all of them are. Like, a couple of them are just slice of life that's not really comedy, it's just random. A couple of them, I have, like, about 5 or 6 crossovers with various things that I like other than ponies. I have, like, 4 or 5 kind of sad stories. Then I have, like, 3 or 4 really long adventure stories. And I just find, for me at least, it's like, oh, I don't feel like writing more of my really long story today, so I'm just gonna, pump out another one-shot for my followers, or I'm gonna do like a sad story because I don't feel like doing comedy right now, So I think having, your bases open, or I don't write romance, but like if you want to write romance or something like that, then you can do that. So I think if you want to have all of your bases covered, that way you as a writer never get bored. Yes.
One more question. I know it's going to be very, very from person to person, but what are your thoughts on how far, like if you're reading a serious story and they have Twilight do something that she would never do in the show, what are your how far do you generally go before you say, I'm not reading because that's unbelievable, Twilight wouldn't do that?
If I've invested a lot of time into the story and character just does something, usually I'll leave a comment or whatever if it's still in progress, and I'll just say, hey, you probably should explain that or whatever. Or I'd just be like, I'd just say, yeah, whatever, I guess I can accept that out of character moment. Or sometimes if it's so blatant, like if it's just, a slice of life story and I'm, 20,000 words into it, and I don't read romance, but say that I was reading a romance between Twilight and Rainbow Dash, and then Twilight just like stabbed Rainbow Dash with her horn for no reason, then yeah, I probably wouldn't finish reading that story. Go ahead.
So I have 2 questions. One, the first is just going to go off of that topic. What about slight reimaginations of characters that are consistent throughout the whole thing? For example, just taking Rarity and making her selfish side win. Like she turns into a scheming, like she gets caught up in the Cantonat. And this is a story that I've actually read. It's a tragedy. And she gets caught up in the Cantonately and has multiple affairs, and there's a bunch of really, pretty dark stuff going on. But they are consistent throughout the whole thing about like who this reimagination of Rarity is. So what are your opinion on that?
I think those can be really good stories. Speaking of famous fan fiction, there's actually a guy named Brony Writer. He's actually from here in Colorado. He said he was going to be at the con. I don't know where he is. If he's one of you, then step up. But I don't mind talking, but... Okay, so here's what I think. Like, he wrote this story where Rarity is a serial killer. Yeah, you've probably heard of it before if you read a lot of fanfic. But, like, I think as long as you stick with it through the whole thing, and you give a pretty, like, reasonable explanation. Like, the explanation I think that Brony Writer gave was, like, she was always just kind of a little bit insane, and then it just snapped one day, if I'm remembering correctly. And then even some of the stories I've written, I've done like slight reimaginings of the characters. So I think it works, just as long it's a matter of what people are willing to read. Like Cupcakes, for instance. Like in the show, Rainbow Dash or Pinkie Pie would never chop up Rainbow Dash and turn her into cupcakes. It's a completely out of character moment. Pretty much every single Clop story is an out of character moment. All these things. I mean, unless you think they all secretly love each other, in which case, I can't really argue with you on that. But
they all secretly love each other.
Yeah, they're way beyond friends.
They're all gay for each other.
They all are.
I really appreciate I really enjoy reimaginations if it's actually well thought out and deliberate. The other question is more of a technical. Have you ever heard of Kurt Vonnegut's, I think, 8 sort of commandments of writing short stories?
Yeah, I've heard of them. I don't really, personally as a writer, I mean, I take people's advice if I think it's good advice, but in terms of like, these are 8 things you should always do, I mean, I have heard of that list of things. I've heard of a lot of list of things. I've heard of Stephen King. I've heard people say, you shouldn't use the word said ever. You should say exclaimed or bursted out or chuckled or anything but the word said. Said is dead. But then I hear some people say, no, you should only use said. And you should describe the character and let the fact that they're excited like speak for itself. Personally, I think either extreme of the argument is kind of bullshit. And I think I'm just going to write how I want to write. And as long as I don't have like glaring grammatical errors or expletives, like as long as I don't say I began to do something, like as long as I don't do things that are like I find to be insufferable. I mean, personally, because like you look at famous fan fiction, you know, going back around to the topic of the panel, like how many of them follow Kurt Vonnegut's 8 commandments to the letter? Like none of them. None of them. Like not even Penstroke, and I think Penstroke is like actually a professional writer in real life, but I'm not sure. Like, not even they follow all of these things. So, I mean, if you are just starting out writing and you need a guideline, guidelines like that can be really helpful. There's also, like, one that I rely on, but not overly so, is Strunk and White's The Elements of Style. You know, it'll tell you, like, how to write, how to be descriptive, how to use correct grammar. But again, you know, it's not the Bible. It's not something you gotta follow every word of. It's just something that, as you're starting out, and as, like, if you're lost, it's something that you can resort to as a guide. So I hope that answers your question. Question?
Actually,